Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Conscious Grief series. I am delighted to be joined by Beth Segaloff today. Beth is a licensed clinical social worker, an EMDR therapist, a Reiki master, and a registered yoga teacher, a breathwork facilitator and meditation teacher, and also somebody who's personally been touched by grief in many ways. So Beth, thank you very, very much for being here. And I'm really excited to speak to you and learn more about your practice, because I love that you incorporate all these different modalities in your healing profession and with your clients. And I was kind of curious to begin with, just to ask how you came to be in the world of healing.
That's a huge question, right? I think it's just, I think as I was a young child, I think when people would say, what do you want to do when you grow up? I always just knew there was a part of me that wanted to help other people. Mm-hmm. And as life happens, I went through a lot. And so I was just always drawn to use my own experience as a way then to support other people. And it's almost like each experience that I had then gave me that level of the opening, once moving through a lot of the pain and the grief and the trauma, that gave the opening to then expand almost deeper into supporting others at different with different modalities. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So were you always in the field of healing, or did you have a sort of another life and another job before becoming a therapist?
I started. It's funny because I still consider myself when somebody says, "What do you do?" The first thing I always say is I'm a social worker, because that's where I started. I in college was in child and family studies, and then I was curious about being a teacher. I loved being in the school systems. And then I realized when I went in for an internship for teaching, I was always really curious about the dynamics of the kids. What was bringing them when they were coming to school? What was it that maybe they were struggling with that contributed to struggling in school? And then, so that really sort of led me to consider being a social worker, to really understand the dynamics of family, of systems. And so I got my master's in social work, and I was a school social worker for about 16 plus years. And I loved that role. I loved it so much because I never wanted to be a therapist who was behind closed doors, sort of back to back with clients all day long. A lot of respect for everybody who does that. And it is partially what I'm doing now, but I didn't want to do that all day long. And I loved being with kids in schools because I would be with them at the lunch table or at the playground or with them in a classroom. So really being able to see them from different perspectives more than solely the one-on-one in a room. So that's sort of where I started.
Okay.
And yeah.
Well, that makes lots of sense. And I really, love what you're saying there about having more of a integrative approach back then, with really socializing with the kids and not just having that sort of client-teacher relationship. And I know that you say that you like to use a multi-layered approach with your clients now. So perhaps you could explain a little bit more about who your clients are at the moment and more about your sort of multi-layered approach.
Sure. Well, I think to describe where I am right now, I'm going to give a little bit of a background to how I got to the multi-layered sort of whole, what I would like to call a whole health perspective. When I was in school social work, I experienced my greatest grief, or my biggest grief, when my fiance was killed in Afghanistan. And through that grief, I started opening up to different types of healing myself. So again, as a therapist, personally, I had been used to going to therapy, talk therapy. And what I was finding was I would do anything to feel a little bit better. And so I started to receive energy healing. I went to EMDR therapy, which I'll describe also a little bit later. And I found my yoga mat. And I found my yoga mat in a very different way than I had before. My yoga mat before was more of a physical practice. I like to sweat, and it was a more of a physical experience. And there was something that flipped for me when I was able to be on the mat and settle. And, you know, it used to be when the teacher would say, quiet your mind and let your body be still. That was my cue to be like, I'm out, right? Like, why would I want to be in my mind or in my body when it was really not a kind or comfortable place to be? And there was something that allowed me to be ready, that felt safe enough for me to be in my body and allow the pain to move through. And there was such massive release, and that took time and patience and practice. But I got to a point where there was such deep healing in that. And so all those things that I learned or that I practiced, I was realizing, you know, we can't only talk our way through our struggles. And so because I integrated all those other modalities, I was just drawn to learn how to guide them myself. So I took a big leap and left my school job. And I became a Reiki master and a yoga teacher, and specifically in grief yoga, and also in yoga for kids. And so, yeah, now I integrate that all with my clients, because it's not just about the mental health. It is also the emotions and the body and the energy piece. So that is the multi-layered approach is just, I find it so integral. And it's really, I found lately, especially I'm working a lot with teenagers right now, and giving them this space to explore and become aware of their body and their breath and their emotions as a compass or a guide to really understand what may be going on with them has been, it's very humbling, and it feels very special to be able to do that.
Yeah, that it sounds very special, you know, like, as you said, giving these young people a head start on things that you and I discovered like a lot later in our lives. And I just think what you're sharing about how we can't think our way out of grief, it's just so important. And sometimes we think that we feel like we just want to think our way out of it or talk our way out of it, but grief affects us on such a physical level as well as an emotional and a mental level. And you and I have met because of the grief yoga teacher training. You're one of the trainers on that. And I always really love to encourage people to move and process their grief physically, because of the concern that it could become, you know, toxic in our bodies and make us physically unwell.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's yes, moving it through, you know, the phrase, the issues are in our tissues, right? And so what happens, and what I noticed in my own body was, right, all this holding, all this constriction in my breath and in my body, and then moving it through, right, using movement, using breath and sound, right, is what we do in grief yoga. And also then bringing it to my clients, but for myself too. Like I know, and I think you know too, it's the walking the talk, right? So really practicing it for myself so that then I can hold more space for other people is what I think is really been what I'm witnessing in myself right now. And knowing when I'm not doing that, right? The other day I was sharing with you before, my son just graduated from high school, and I'm feeling a lot of grief around that, around him leaving and transitioning into what does that mean for me? And my mind has been so busy. And the other day I was just like, get into the body, like quiet the mind and get into the body. And I felt safe enough to be able to do that. And with the skills of, and let the sensations move through. And they do, they always shift, always, if we give it that space. But you know, most people, it's really, we're so patterned and to go, because who wants to sit with that? It's not fun, right? Not like, great, let's just sit in that pain right now. But when we do, you know this too, there's something mysterious and beautiful on the other side. And there's a lot of trust in giving ourselves the space to do that.
You know, I'd just like to go back a little bit. And you mentioned about the biggest grief in your life, which was the passing of your fiance, Ben, in Afghanistan. So I can imagine how traumatic that was for you. And I'm just thinking about the people who are listening who may feel like they relate in some way. And I'm just wondering if you could just speak a little bit more about him and how you were at that time.
So as a quick background, I was married. We had a son together. My son's name is Danny. That divorce was also, there was a lot of grief in that divorce, a lot of courage in that. And after my divorce, I met Ben, and it was one of those moments where it was like, oh, like this is what we've been waiting for. And 6 weeks into our dating, he said to me, I have good news and bad news. The good news is we're getting married next summer, and the bad news is I'm deploying. And we spent, so our time together was brief. And what I know to be true is that this concept that we talk about grief being connected to love, I know that my grief can feel so strong because of the love that we experienced. And when two men showed up at my door, it was the moment that my life was a before and after. And I was just shattered. My life felt crumbled, broken, and traumatized, and heartbroken, and confused, and angry. And I went through all of it. And it was very, very painful. And at the same time, right, I took this, like, I'll do anything I can to feel a little bit better. And step by step, it's been a very long road. He died in 2009. And I remember in the beginning, I said, the best legacy that I can leave is to live my life with more joy and more love. And yes, and that has been sometimes impossible. And sometimes it's been very true. And I feel like a lot of the work that I'm doing, if he had not died, I would not be doing grief yoga. I would not be necessarily, I don't know if I would have walked down this sort of spiritual path and opened up to tapping into more of my intuition and connecting to source and to the people that I've met. I mean, I'd give anything to have him back. But it has definitely led me down a very unexpected road in a way that I feel like I can contribute to supporting other people.
Thank you so much for sharing more about what happened. And it's just, gosh, my heart just goes out to you. It's so heartbreaking. And it was interesting what you shared, that you have from that opened up potentially in your spiritual beliefs.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing more about that, how that's shifted for you?
Well, my personal sort of belief is, right, we are all spiritual beings. It's how we're brought into this world. And then life happens, and beliefs and blocks and layers build that distract us from our love towards ourselves. And I think a lot of things happened in my life, even before Ben died, that built those walls, that then I turned to a lot of, numbing and avoiding.
Why are we here, right? What is the purpose of all of this? Like, if I'm going to, what is the purpose? Why so much pain? Why so much struggle? Why did this have to happen to me? Why did this have to happen to him? So all of these questions, and I decided to look, and really sort of do a lot of soul searching. And that's again why just talking it through wasn't enough for me. And opening up all those other layers led me down a path, a more of a spiritual path, because it did open up to a world of energy and a world of there is more than just this here. And that's been beautiful and challenging. And because I do believe that I do believe in spirit, and I believe that love is infinite, and he is with me always. And so there's guidance in that as well. That's also, it's beautiful. And it's also really, again, I'd rather him here. But there is that spiritual path has it's funny, right? A lot of people are like, oh, I'm, on the spiritual path. It's like rainbows and sunny, and it is, and it's not, right? It is dark and scary. And at least for me, it was, because it's looking at both. I feel like this part of my life has really put me into the darkest place I've ever been, questioning why I'm even here. Do I want to be here? And then moving through that also that life can be magical and light and loving. And so it's all of it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will be listening to this and really relating to everything that you're sharing. There is something, like you were saying, being in the pain, like we don't want to be in the pain. Our natural response to pain is to stop it and to run from it or to numb it. And as you said, there's something powerful if we do learn to sort of just be with it and feel it in our bodies and allow it to pass through us. And I wonder if there's anything that you could specifically perhaps like mention to people who might be watching this about a little technique that they could use about how to just sit in it and be in it.
I think I just did it, right? I just exhaled. I think that one tool that is with us always, and it's free, is our breath.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, it's interesting because I had my, I run this series for teenagers, and it's called Life School. And I had my first round with them, our first session last night. And some of the kids were talking about feeling, stressed and self-doubt and all of these things. And I guided them in a 3-part breath. And then they felt calm and chill. So it's free. No one has to know you're doing it. I mean, there's certain breathing techniques that are obvious, but some are discreet and subtle, and no one knows. And it really can shift. And, I like to look at emotions as like the wave of an ocean. that they are up and down, up and down. And sometimes we're like on the raft and it's smooth and it's sunny. And sometimes it is like a wave comes crashing down and you feel that overwhelm. But they always, always shift. And so if we can give ourselves the time and the patience and the trust to be in it. And I know that it always changes. It may take 10 seconds. It may take 2 hours. It may take 5 minutes, but they always change. And I think, like you said, it's, we really quickly want to fix it and make it better and move on and avoid. But the truth is that there's no fixing because they're not broken. Emotions are energy that just need to be moved through. And I think if we can look at them as not right or wrong or good or bad, but they are energy that need to be moved through. And a lot of that I did learn through yoga, through breath work, and through EMDR.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's talk about EMDR a little bit, because not everybody's familiar with EMDR. And yeah. I've had one session myself and I thought it was really amazing. Mm-hmm. But I could never remember what the whole EMDR stands for. So perhaps you can start with that.
Sure. So it stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing, but no one has to remember that. It's okay. I'll try to sum it up sort of generally, is that, as we've talked about, we all have experiences, right? Positive, negative. Every experience we have roots into our brain. It roots into our brain. It forms a belief, right? So it could be when you're in class one day in 2nd grade and a teacher says to you, and you really want to say something, right? You keep your hand up and a teacher says, Beth, like, put your hand down, like you're talking too much, be quiet. That teacher, no intention, right? Of like, except for trying to teach the class. And Beth keeps raising her hand because she forgets what she's going to say. That may instill what I say doesn't matter.
Right.
Okay, so over time, what I say doesn't matter roots in, and then it also finds a place in my body. For something like that, it could be right, maybe in my throat. Maybe I have like neck pain or shoulder pain because I haven't been able to express myself. What I say doesn't matter. So then I may feel, and then what I say doesn't matter manifests and ripples into everywhere else. And it's really, I find it fascinating. And so with EMDR, what we do is we really see what is showing up in the present moment. Somebody comes in with a present situation. And then it's, okay, so I'm saying this in a couple different ways, because we're always, in EMDR, we're always kind of titrating between the past, the present, and the future. Because what happens is what we can do in the present moment, just as much as those rooted beliefs are in the past, in the present moment, what we can do with EMDR is resource something now, like anchor in something now, so that in the present, an hour later, becomes the past. So just as much as like what I say doesn't matter, if we're in a session together, we can resource something that like you want to feel or you have experienced that is positive, that you want to, a resource or quality that you want to instill. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So let's say it's confidence. We can resource confidence so that that is then enhanced and integrated into your brain and into your body. So we really focus on the thoughts, the sensations in your body. And we do that through the eye movement. It's really about what, and you don't have to remember this either, it's called bilateral stimulation. So it's really just left to right. So we're moving left to right as we are focusing on the thoughts in the mind and the sensations in the body. It's really, I love it so much. And then what I love too is because then I bring in some more of the movement or the breathing. And so for me, it's just kind of like throwing other things in the kitchen sink if that makes sense. And with EMDR as well, if and when we decide to reprocess an old memory, the way to really sort of look at this is it's really about shifting perspective rather. So for example, let's say it's that, I can tell you for me personally, one of the things that I experienced when I was notified that Ben died, I don't know why, but I literally went and sat in my closet. I sat in my closet and just like curled up. And so the closet became a trigger for me. And so, you know, opening a closet, whatever it may be, would just be like it would just feel this like a shot to my heart. And so being able to move through that, it then takes the energy away. So it's almost like turning the volume down on it. It's looking at it through a different lens. It's kind of taking the color out of it, so it doesn't feel as daunting. And then you can look at it like, oh, that happened, right? So even for my ability to share the story about Ben without being able to share it from a place of growth and expansion, more from a place of like the trauma of it, is partially because I've been through so much of all of those modalities.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that personal example, because I think that really helps people to, you know, understand why in grief that EMDR can be a helpful resource for them. Yeah. And
right, because how many times do you see something that reminds you of the experience or that person, where again, then through EMDR, it's just a way to soften it so that we don't have to be in the pain of it as much.
Yeah.
Right, letting go of some of the pain.
Yeah, letting go of some of that pain. I wanted to ask you, changing gears slightly. So you said that you wanted to rebrand mental health.
Yes.
And I really love this concept. So how do you see rebranding mental health?
Well, I want to rebrand mental health because it's not just a mental health issue, because whoever is listening to this, every human in the world, by the way, has mental health, right? Like, I wish we could agree that mental health is just, we all have a mind, and so we all have mental health. And there is still shame. I think there's still shame in getting support. And so again, it's looking through this whole health perspective. So because it's not only mental health, it is physical, it is emotional, it is spiritual. And when I say spiritual, by the way, to me, that's, you can change any word: source, God, even intuition. That is a big piece of when we use all of these layers, and when we are able to weave through all of the mental, the emotional, the breath, the physical, we get to listen to our intuition. And that's what's been really cool about working with the teenagers, because when they are like, oh, they're like, yeah, my body told me this. The pain in my body was, they're able to then recognize, oh, my emotions were connected to this in my body. And so then I knew to make this choice aligning with what feels light. How amazing is that?
That is amazing.
Right? So that's the thing. When I look at the teenagers, I'm like, I created that because that's what I wish I had at that age. There's a lot that I went through as a teenager that also led to, it's another story. But again, having that awareness is something that a lot of people are not teaching. And it's really, I find it fun. That's my a version of fun for me.
Well, yeah, it is. It's so important if people can understand this kind of thing from a young age, because a lot of us are really disconnected from our bodies. And like you say, we're not being taught about how much information our bodies can give us, like you say, for whether it's decision making or like, I don't feel comfortable with this person or in this place, and learning to trust that. Right. And when people are grieving, that's also, you know, we don't feel comfortable in certain situations or around certain people, and that's okay when your body gives you a signal, you know, that you can only be at this place for a certain amount of time and you need to take rest and honor your body, honor yourself when you're grieving. Because again, the messages that we have is just to sort of try and be normal, you try and carry on in our lives as we were, and that's just not possible for most people.
It's not. And yes, it is learning how to listen to your body, and most of us don't want to do that because sometimes it was not a safe place to be. And right when we are grieving, our body can shut down. Our body can shut down. And it's so I think I want to share something that's very personal that I probably never said before, but this is an important like example of how our body can shut down in grief. I've never said this live anywhere. I went through menopause after Ben died. I was 36.
Wow.
But it was probably like a couple years later because I don't totally remember. But I went to the doctor and they asked me when I last got my period. And I was like, I don't know. And then we connected a lot of the symptoms, but I thought it was grief. And the doctor was like, you like trauma-induced menopause. And I was like, what? But talk about an example of your body reacting. My body just shut down completely. And I didn't even know it because I thought it was but I thought it was all the grief I was experiencing. And it was, but it was also, it's fascinating, right?
It's so fascinating.
And even just thinking about it around, we had planned on having children, and we'd even talked about like getting pregnant before he left. And I was like, I think we should wait, until you get home. But it's like, even that is like that, the grief around that part of family that, and then connected to my body, literally saying like, that's it.
Wow, Beth, there's so much there.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It is.
A lot of layers.
Yeah. And so getting to my mat and letting myself be still. See, that's when it's like the movement is so important, but the stillness too of like listening to all of that, because your body always has something to say.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for feeling like you could speak about that in this interview. And it is a really important thing because, again, I don't think people have a lot of people have any idea about the effects that it can have on our body. Yeah. It's so deep and it's so profound. And one of the things that motivates me a lot to do this work is when my father died, my mum really did repress her grief and she got breast cancer. And I feel like that was, part of the grief repression. And then back then we really didn't have a lot of awareness about much. Right. Yeah. But
there is so much. So I love that you're doing this because there is so much awareness. And again, and you're bringing this with so many different layers for people. Because there are so many, we know that grief can come in many forms, right?
Right. Yes. And it's reminding me actually in the New Earth, Eckhart Tolle talks about women's cycles actually, and that can, you know, when your period becomes irregular or stops, and the relationship between that and depression as well. Yeah.
Right. So how do you discern what's going on? Is it grief? Is it depression? Is it my body? And it's all of it. And that's where I think what's been so interesting, even like since the pandemic, is the word grief is now okay to use. I feel like it's really, people were not, it wasn't as, I don't know what word to use, but I think people are much more open to talking about grief, because grief is everything.
It is.
Right. I don't know if it was David or Paul that coined this term, but I use it all the time around, you know, if we're going to love in this life, we're going to grieve. And so it's, it's a part of our life.
Yeah, it is.
And we can either avoid it or not. And I think for me, that's what it is after Ben died, I'm like, I just can't avoid this anymore. I can't numb anymore. I have to look at this. And so again, it's like, then I just want to open that up for other people, because at one point I remember saying to myself, I want to stand in the empowerment and the wisdom more than the pain. And that was a shift for me, that there is wisdom here. Yeah. And that the pain doesn't have to be forever. It comes back. You know that.
Yeah.
It shows up. And that's okay.
I loved what you were sharing earlier about not judging the feelings. And, you know, we always live in this right or wrong, good or bad frame. And it's just all energy. I love that, what you shared. Yeah. My final question, Beth, is just to ask, since this is called the Conscious Grief series, what is your interpretation of conscious grief?
I was thinking about that this morning when I think it's being present with wherever I am and what's happening. If I'm not present in my grief or whatever I'm experiencing, then it's not conscious. And so I think conscious grieving is about being present to where I am in the moment, accepting it, being with it, and being compassionate with myself. And maybe conscious when I'm not being compassionate with myself. But I think it's being present to whatever is showing up in the moment, and the willingness to continue to come back and be present.
Yeah. Thank you.
Even when it's hard.
Yeah. Thank you for that reminder, you know, that we can always come back. We can always come back. Is there anything else that you would like to share just before we finish?
I think the only other thing that's coming to me is when people always, a lot of people say, well, how, you know, it must be so hard. It must be so hard. You know, you've been through so much. And yes, and everybody has their own story, and everybody's story matters. And I think the one thing that I do that I feel proud of is that I continue to show up. I continue to be willing to look at the stuff that's hard and ask for support when I need it. And I think that's what I just really want people to know, that they're not alone, that everybody has something, and that it's that you're not alone, and your story matters, and that there's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. You don't need to be fixed. That you're not alone.
Well, thank you, Beth. And we'll put a link to your website underneath this so people can contact you. And I just feel you have such a big heart, and you do so much to support other people. And I just want to say thank you for all that you do. And as you said, it's important for people to be remembered to ask for help, and that there's no shame in that, and we don't have to do everything alone. Yeah.
And I want to thank you so much because it's been such an honor to get to know you. And I just love what you're creating here. And it's so important. And this is a space for people to know they're not alone.
Exactly.
You know, and that's my hope, that people either they see a part of, it doesn't have to be the same story at all, but just see a part of, and for all the other people that you're connecting to, that somebody can hear something that can then help them. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you. And to everybody that's been listening or watching, thank you and bye-bye.